Well, hello, everyone. My name is Bob Bowman. I am managing editor of Supply Chain Brain, and I'm pleased to welcome you today to this webinar sponsored by Seaburger on the subject of the critical issue of protecting against data breach. The title of the webinar is Time to Secure Your Data, a wake-up call for supply chain executives. Providing that wake-up call today will be two distinguished speakers, Brent Tisdale. He is CPG Business Director of Seaburger North America, and Derek Brink. He is Vice President and Research Fellow for IT Security with Aberdeen Group. At this point then, without further ado, I'm pleased to turn over the presentation to Brent Tisdale. Brent?
Thank you, Bob. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending today's Managed File Transfer webinar. Again, my name is Brent Tisdale, Director of CPG at Seaburger, and I will be one of the presenters today. And joining me is Derek Brink, VP of Research at the Aberdeen Group. Now, today's topic will focus specifically on securing corporate assets, which is the data that is widely used by knowledge workers to perform their daily activities throughout the extended enterprise. Now, our aim today is to provide some insights on how to avoid the costly data breaches and the associated possible disasters that can happen sometimes within your respective companies. Our approach also would include or be likened to the point-counterpoint perspective, as Derek and I have two distinct views on the data breach topic. Derek's view will be a research-based view, where we'll provide best-in-class type of companies and how they're using managed file transfer. My view will be based on what is taking place in the marketplace. Derek and I will have a mixture of slides throughout this presentation, and we'll be exchanging our conversations accordingly. Here are the objectives for today. What we're going to do today is talk about the pervasiveness of data breaches. We're going to talk about the costs associated with data breaches, then identify some of the data security-related business risks that exist in the marketplace today. The next, what we like to do is focus on the file transfer technologies that are being used today and some of their shortfalls. Then what we'd like to do is step back and define what is managed file transfer, and then how do you leverage managed file transfer to gain control over the data breaches that are perhaps taking place in your respective companies. And then identify basically some industry-leading solutions to help mitigate the risk and protect the data. Now, how pervasive is data breach, or are data breaches taking place in the marketplace today? Working with CIOs, Robert Half Technology conducted a study on information security. And what the study showed is that what kept CIOs up at night was the idea that sensitive data was getting into the wrong hands. And that was a reflection of about 24% of the respondents responded as such. And what underscored their fear is the fact that they have, and the CIOs have experienced approximately 3 to 5 data breaches a year within their organization. Now, there's another study that was conducted by Verizon and the U.S. Secret Service from a large data set. And what they did was they found that the following data points as they're related to internal breaches. They did have information around external breaches, but from an internal breach perspective, of all the breaches that they took a look at, 48% of those breaches were internal. Now, who or what was the cause of these breaches? Of that 48%, employee misuse of a specific corporate data represented 48% of the breaches that were taking place. Employee tactic was 28% of why the breaches were taking place. And employee tactic basically says an employee had some intention on using that data incorrectly. So in short, data breaches do exist, and in various measures they need to be protected and guarded against so that they do not disrupt the company and cost the company any financial loss. Now, on the next slide, Derek is going to talk about what is happening in the current enterprise environment that perhaps gives rise to some of the data breaches. He's going to talk about the 3 V's and the 3 C's.
Brent, thank you, and hi, everybody. Derek Brink here from the Aberdeen Group in Boston. And before we leave this current slide, I'll mention that given the nature of the research that we do, which is really focused on the enterprise globally. We do similar studies, and I just wanted to mention that in the study that I've most recently done on the area of file transfer, we see a very similar finding. On average, it was about 7, but the point I wanted to make that maybe takes it a step further is we have a technique where we kind of sort all the respondents into a bell-shaped curve, if you will, kind of a normal distribution, and the best performers kind of go to the front end of that curve, as you would expect, like those are the A students, if you will, and the average is in the fat part of the curve, the hump there. The relatively worst performers among the group go to the bottom. And what we found is that the top performers experienced just 1 breach in the last 12 months, whereas the worst performers experienced 11, and in the middle it was in the neighborhood of 6 or 7, I guess. So it does kind of flow in a curve. So looking at the average is interesting, but you can also improve yourself and have that, what we call anyway, best-in-class performance, and it ends up being quite a significant difference, especially when you multiply, a reduction in the number of breaches by the cost. So having said that, I'll show this slide here now. It always falls to the analyst guy, Brent, right, or the MBA, to talk about the 3 V's and the 3 C's, but it's quite relevant just to put it in a business context for the audience here. The 3 V's refer to volume and variety and velocity. Now, in terms of volume, what we're seeing going on is certainly a higher volume of data. There's more data being created and stored and managed and shared, as well as the sheer size of those files. In terms of variety, we're seeing a proliferation of formats that enterprise data now assumes, particularly in the unstructured or file-based formats, all kinds of multimedia types, of still images, audio files, video files, and so on. And the velocity is increasing as well. The speed at which data is flowing in and out of the enterprise and amongst the supply chain, the pressure that is put on the IT departments to support the users and the business to provide faster access anytime and from any location and from any device. So those are kind of the 3 V's, if you will. At the same time, on the C side, the 3 C's, collaboration is really the name of the game here. We're trying to support collaboration. The data is not meant to be, hidden away. It's created to be shared for the most part, and we've got more users involved just in sheer quantity, but also the populations are more diverse. It's not just internal users, it's external users in the supply chain. There's partners, customers in many cases. Consumerization is an issue too. It's the second of the 3 C's. We've got more user-owned, user-managed devices. So just in the last 2 years, it's remarkable how rapidly the influx of the tablets and smartphones and so on has been within the enterprise. All of this leads to complexity, and it makes it more difficult, which is why I think it contributes to that insomnia that we were talking about before. So all that naturally leads to is this need, even an increase in the need for enterprises to move their data securely and reliably from one person to another, and from one system to another, and from one application to another, from one business to another. So those are the 3 C's and the 3 V's.
Super, Derek. What I'm going to do is talk a little bit, now that you have a view of the 3 V's and 3 C's, let's talk about what are the business documents that are at risk? Here's a snapshot of the various types of unstructured business documents that support the knowledge workers in this extended enterprise. And the key points I'd like to bring up here is as follows. Knowledge workers rely upon a variety of business documents that come in a variety of formats. And as you can see here, from emails through the large CAD files to perform their daily tasks. For example, if you're a CPG retail company or company just engaged in what I call intensive collaboration before you get into the execution phase. The execution phase basically means, you're going to execute your purchase orders, you're going to execute your purchase orders, your invoices and your cash with your specific trading partners using current vehicles that are in place today. Prior to that point, you have the collaborative planning process using such techniques as CPFR, collaborative planning, forecast, and replenishment. If you know the CPRF, then you're aware of the fact that during the planning stage, there's a large number of documents in various formats that are being exchanged. For example, you're exchanging business plans, you're exchanging forecasts, you're exchanging point-of-sale information. If, for example, you're launching new products, you're launching new design information is being exchanged, videos, images. If you're pushing data or pushing products down to the level of the store level, you're looking at floor data plans, and you're looking for sizing information, color information. So what you recognize is that knowledge workers are working with a large amount of data that really drives the execution of strategies for the organization. You'll also see in this particular document that each document will have a certain level of sensitivity in terms of if there's a breach, will there be a problem? And this is something that has to be managed and governed. And finally, what you'll see at the bottom, you see that these documents or these document formats range and vary in size. And it creates various communication vehicles that are being used, from something as simple as email to something as much more complex, maybe as file transfer protocol, which we'll talk about more in a second. These actual delivery vehicles must be managed as well in order to avoid costly breaches. The takeaway here is that basically your corporate assets must be secured and governed, even though they're in some mind, it may not be as sensitive as other documents, but overall, when you're looking at the planning process and knowledge workers executing their day-to-day activities, these documents, here again, must be managed more proactively instead of waiting until a breach actually happens. Now, the next question is, what is the cost of a breach? Here's a study that was done by Symantec Corporation and Ponemon Institute. And what they did was they estimated that each data breach has an average organizational cost of $7.2 million. It's a lot of money. And you're thinking maybe, well, what's driving that cost? Well, the cost could include such things as legal costs, brand image costs, loss of customers, impact on share value, or the cost of the organization to respond to the problem. And I think we're all familiar with the cost of organizations responding to a breach. That is, it may take 1 or 2 weeks for the organization to dig into why did it happen, how do we remedy the problem. And when you take valuable knowledge workers off of projects that they're working on that could be revenue-driving projects and move towards reacting to a problem, there's an opportunity costs right there. The cost can be very sizable here, again, based on the type of data breach. One of the largest and costliest breaches reported by Symantec was about a $35 million breach. And the least expensive breach, here again, based upon the type of breach that happened, was about $780,000 breach as reported by Symantec. So really the takeaway here is this. I think we've established the fact that breaches do happen. As Derek mentioned, there's a bell-shaped curve. You may have a lot of breaches. You have the average in the middle, and then you have the low end, the best in class. And the key thing here is that what's associated with the breach is a cost. Now, I think Derek's is a good point. Do we decide to manage this data just purely based on cost avoidance? And I think Derek has a point that perhaps we ought to look not only at cost avoidance as a motivator for choosing a much more better tool, but also we may look at opportunities. So how do we better share the data or share data that we haven't shared before because we have a much more managed approach to moving the information around or transferring it between knowledge workers, both internal and external to a company.
Let me just elaborate on that real quickly, if it's okay.
Sure.
The cost avoidance one, I think everybody gets. We're trying to avoid having, bad things happen, and we know that when they do happen, they have a cost. So that everybody, gets that, I think. There's also the cost savings part, which, as you mentioned, is if you're going to do things anyway, like share files and make that an integral part of the supply chain, you'd like to do that as efficiently as possible, right? So if you can do it at half the cost of the other guy and be secure and reliable while you're doing it, then that's it's a plus to you. It's a cost saving. So those are very important. Being in compliance and is certainly another driver. But the point that you made last, I think, is probably the most important one, which is the enablement piece. If you're able to do things and support the business and innovate partner and do things because of the fact that you can do so securely and reliably, then I think that goes to the credit of the initiative as well. So there's kind of four places to look. It's compliance and risk and cost and also this enablement point. And all four, if you can make that business case based on at least looking at all four, I think you're better off.
I agree with you, Derek. Those are very good points. What we're going to do now is move to our first poll question. And I think Bob's going to go ahead and read that poll question for you. And what we'd like for you to do is take about 30 seconds and respond based on your knowledge of what's taking place in your company. Bob?
Yeah, you will see the poll question appear in a window, and you can select your answer there. So, poll question number 1, which of the following best describes your company policies regarding data security? A, policies are clearly defined and strictly enforced. B, general guidelines exist but are loosely enforced. C, policies vary from department to department and application to application. D, I am unaware of policies regarding the transfer of unstructured files. So we'll give you about 30 seconds to select an answer, and then we'll discuss the results. Okay, it's actually, I don't think we need the 30 seconds. It's already looking like everyone's checked in with their response. And so here's what we see. If you can see that, gentlemen.
Yes, we can. From my interactions in the marketplace, I tend to concur with what I see. There are basic, what I see are two responses, 50-50. And the responses are general guidelines exist but are loosely enforced, or the other one is I'm unaware of policies regarding the transfer of unstructured files. And this is what we find in the marketplace today, I think because of various reasons. Some of the behaviors in the marketplace today have been crystallized and become culture, and that knowledge workers are basically looking to perform the task and perform their duties, and not necessarily are aware of the policies that govern how the sensitive data should be moving back and forth within the organization. The tools that are in place today don't necessarily lend themselves for the management or the enforcement of those policies. So that's what I'm hearing when I talk to various people in the marketplace. Derek, you have a view here?
Well, no, but I think the other way to respond to this is that it is a characteristic of the companies that have the best performance that they do have policies defined, and that they are well communicated, and that they are also actually enforced. So you can kind of take the data and turn it around in that way to kind of paint the way towards what is pretty obvious that should be done.
Makes sense. So I'm going to go ahead and move to our next slide, and let's talk a little bit about a question of identifying the data security related risk. And here's a view that I'd like you to take. As you drive your car down the highway, there are rules that govern how you travel, and if you breach those specific rules, then you are fined. The same is true, in my view, on the information highway. There are regulations, specifically in that red circle that I have there on the side, that if breached will cost an organization in terms of penalties. These regulations are sometimes well known and sometimes not well known. The one we know about are HIPAA, there's a Sarbanes-Oxley, and there's just a list of internal and external mandates. Here again, the specific rules that govern how the information should move. So if you look at the various departmental swim lanes that I have here, you can see the types of documents in the various vehicles that if inappropriately misused, I should say, can result in some form of a breach. And that breach is a costly impact, as you see on the far right-hand column. It could be legal impact, brand impact, the actual fines and penalties associated with an external mandate that actually dictates, here again, inappropriate use of data. So what you may want to consider doing is implementing controls, which are forms of countermeasures for reducing or eliminating the vulnerabilities and the threats. Those controls could come perhaps in the form of first educating knowledge workers. As I mentioned earlier, that 48% who inadvertently misuse the use of either a vehicle that's used for sending out data or the data itself. And you educate them on the policies and the procedures for exchanging the corporate assets. And then what you do is you back that policy education with a technology to help govern and enforce those policies with an eye towards simplicity, so that the knowledge worker can actually perform their task and not be impeded by technology. With that, I'm going to move to Derek, who's going to talk a little bit more about the current tools in the marketplace that we're using for exchanging this critical corporate information.
All right, thank you. And as you can see here, I've tried to create just a little graphic to help categorize the ways that these things are typically done. There's really 3 columns if you want to look at it that way. The first column I'm calling here, back to my alliteration, I guess, because I didn't realize I was that classically analyst or MBA in my alliteration here, but the copy and carry approach just refers to the use of physical storage media like tapes or CDs or DVDs or USB sticks to copy the information in digital form and carry it, transport it somehow to its intended recipients. This could be done either by sneakernet, could be done by courier, by overnight delivery service, or any other physical delivery mechanism. On the middle column, the digital do-it-yourself column, as I've called it, this refers to the use of any number of self-service mechanisms, but transferring those files digitally or electronically here. So it could include the non-commercial FTP servers, Brent, that you've alluded to already. It could be the very common attachment to emails. It could be in-house programs and scripts that have been developed and exist over the years, maybe even by people who are no longer even with the company. Or increasingly lately, as we talked before about the consumerization trend and bring your own device and so on, a number of consumer-oriented Dropbox-type solutions. And the third column is as you move from left to right, it's more mature and advanced. Third column represents the secure and managed file transfer capabilities. This really refers to commercially supported file transfer solutions. They can support multiple file types and protocols. They can integrate with multiple platforms and applications and existing IT infrastructure. They can address the kind of security and compliance requirements that we've been talking about. They can provide this, really the goal of reliable and easy-to-use delivery mechanism and also, as we've been talking about, cost-effective management. So the kind of the dashed oval ring there around those bottom right corner there, that's really what we're talking about here.
Great. What I'd like to do now, guys, is move to the next poll question, and Bob will introduce the specific question. Thanks a lot, Derek.
Yes, thank you. All right, the second poll question is, at your company, what is the most commonly used method for moving large files from one system or individual to another? A, email. B, shared folders on an internal network. C, managed file transfer solution. D, individual FTP processes. Or E, USB thumb drive device. Give it just a few more seconds here. Okay, once again, looks pretty unanimous, gentlemen. So
yes.
Back to you.
Derek, you have any thoughts? It looks like what we have, and it could be just a function of the knowledge workers that we have on the phone, that we have a 100% response using email. You know, email typically is the standard tool that's used by knowledge workers to, in effect, communicate not only internally but externally within an organization. It does have its file limit size, and it does have other concerns with regards to audit traceability, and as well as security. So I tend to see some of, in my engagements in the marketplace, that email is typically the #1 tool used for the exchange of documents that are used by knowledge workers.
I know it's the #1 when we ask questions about what's your concern about the channel for data loss or data leakage. Email is the #1 channel for sure, but I think if we include in all of the above response here in the polling question, we probably see that checked as well. I think most companies probably have examples of all of these going on.
Yeah, that makes sense. That does make sense. So what we're going to do now, Derek, you're going to move down and talk a little bit more about why the traditional approaches are no longer sufficient, and they leave gaps when you look at managed file transfer, governance, and policy management.
Yeah, I get to have some fun now and just talk about the shortcomings of all these other approaches, right? So just kind of bang away at them for the next 4 slides, I think. Some of these traditional approaches are no longer sufficient, and here's some of the limitations of the physical copy and carry mechanisms that we talked about. Cost is definitely one. You have to create and drop off and deliver the physical media for shipment. That can be error-prone. It can be time-consuming. If you're going to use an expedited delivery service, like if you're in the city and use a courier, or if you're using the express services across the country, that can be very costly. Sometimes business cases are made purely on the basis of not having those express delivery charges. If you care about these things, the environmental costs, like reducing the carbon dioxide emissions from the fuel that you use for transporting things physically, could sometimes be a consideration. In terms of time, even same-day or overnight delivery services are slower than direct electronic file transfer. And in terms of security and compliance, which of course is a big factor in what we're talking about here today, you have the question, well, while it's been in transit, who may have had access or who might have copied your critical data? Use of encryption for confidentiality and integrity of the data to protect against that concern could add considerable cost and complexity and time to an approach which is really supposed to be just quick and simple. So that's some of the things to think about if you're relying upon those physical copy and carry approaches. If we move on then to the digital do-it-yourself mechanism, starting with FTP, convenience and scale are definitely one bucket of things to think about. For example, a request to enable a new FTP account, if there are such things already, require an action to be taken by a system administrator. You may need to get this done on kind of an urgent basis, and those requests to your IT department may or may not be serviced with that kind of response time. They could take hours or even days in some cases to be fulfilled, and meanwhile you've got this time-sensitive file transfer that you've got, and you don't want to deal with that unacceptable delay. The servers just lack many other useful mechanisms if you're just talking about those generic ones that you can stand up on your own. The sender verification, for example, that a transfer is incomplete. A verification on the receiver side of the integrity of the file that's been received. And as we've talked about again and again, security is a big issue here. It doesn't really have an inherent method for encryption, and you're sending data in the clear. There are extensions like SFTP or FTPS. Those are actually different. It's not a typo. Those can be confusing and maybe not interoperable. You got other concerns about the manual nature of FTP as a process. For example, placing files on an FTP server may stay there until they're manually deleted, and that exposes them to unauthorized access. The FTP servers themselves are often not secure, and so end users might have access to data, again, that's not intended for them. Let's look ahead here again. Email attachments, a lot of people do that, as we've seen. The file size is definitely a concern. We've talked already about the size of the files getting larger. So typical enterprise email configurations have policies that restrict attachment sizes to, say, 10 megabytes or less. And many file sizes are growing larger than that, even when they're zipped and so on. Performance is an issue, can be an issue. Email really wasn't designed to handle extremely large files, and so timely and reliable delivery often proves to be problematic. I don't know how many times you've been on a call and somebody says, well, I've just sent that file to you, and 5-10 minutes may go by and people are saying, well, did you get it yet, and so on, and that may not be acceptable for the nature of your process. In terms of storage, large attachments can certainly eat up a lot of space. Often there are multiple copies of large attachments, right? So if you even small ones can eat up allocated storage if you think about sending a 1 megabyte file to 1,000 employees. So either way, you can have that same effect about eating up the disk space. And security and compliance, again, come into play. Too often the policy here is left to users taking the proper actions. And as we saw in our poll here, not all users even are quite aware of what the proper actions in terms of policy are. So having it left to behavior on the part of the individual end users versus being automated by the solution providers can be a pretty big deal. And if you look lastly at things here like custom in-house scripts, and this would apply equally well to the consumer Dropbox type solutions. This is really unsupported infrastructure. Like for example, if you've got a custom in-house script that's been developed, it's probably using FTP somehow. It's widely available, of course, for free, and that's why it's found its way into organizations of just about every size. But it's often embedded in these custom programs and scripts that were developed by somebody who might have long since left the company. The policies are unenforced, are highly unlikely to reflect the organization's current policies for security and compliance, and the risks are unacknowledged. Organizations might be dependent on these file transfers as part of their regular business process flow. They continue to take place on a daily basis, but they might not be making a conscious assessment of the risk. And when you are accepting, well, when you're ignoring risk, you're essentially accepting it, I guess is the point. So again, this applies pretty equally well to the commercial Dropbox-type solutions. Are so easy for end users to stand up and get access to and kind of carry out their job, but you're subject to this unsupported, unenforced, and unacknowledged sort of situation in those environments as well. So there's problems with all those areas, which is why, again, it points the focus squarely on the commercially supported, secure managed file transfer solutions.
Great, Derek, and I think that brings us right to the question: what is managed file transfer? Which is a question that when those who are not familiar with that acronym need to know. MFT and managed file transfer, what does it mean? And it really is a gap filler. It is to ensure compliance when there's so many gaps with the various vehicles that are being used today. Managed file transfer in a definition perspective refers to software solutions, that facilitate the secure transfer of data from one computer to another through a network, the internet, specifically. And the MFT solutions are often built using FTP network protocol. However, the term specifically remedies the disadvantages associated with FTP, email, and the other vehicles that we talked about that Derek just referred to. Now, typically, MFT offers a higher level of security and governance over FTP and all those other vehicles. So if you take a look at some of the boxes we have here, what you'll find is that managed file transfer offers the following and probably more. For example, from secure communications, it enhances the amount of security for documents in flight. From a compression standpoint, it provides the ability to provide services, if needed, to reduce the size of large business documents. Checkpoint restart basically is the ability to automatically provide a retransmission of a document at the point of destruction. Encryption, which protects the specific documents in flight or at rest. Workflow, very important, because workflow defines how various documents, from Word documents, for example, to CAD/CAM documents, can be specifically managed through their life cycle. What I mean by their life cycle, when they're at rest or in flight. For example, a user, they may decide that a CAD file needs 2 steps. It may need a compression step. It may need an encryption step before it's sent to an external party. And what happens is the workflow has an automatic engine that could provide those services without the end user being involved. Here again, the simplicity. Management and visibility basically says, do we have the ability to enforce the policies to ensure compliance? And as was mentioned just a second ago in one of the polls is, I know about the policies, but they're not necessarily enforced through the vehicles that I'm using. And so an MFT stack will provide that ability to enforce those policies to ensure some level of compliance. Visibility is very important, not only for the management, but for knowledge workers. The ability to know the status of the end-to-end transfers of all the documents. Just a second ago, Derek mentioned, sending an email to someone with a critical attachment, and you don't know if they received it or not. Or you go about your day working, and you expect that they did receive it, and they're working on the actual information that you sent them. A day goes by, and you call them up and say, okay, what did you think, and do you have a deliverable for me? And the response is, I never got the email. Not only does that slightly disheartening, but more importantly, as Derek mentioned, it may not be good for your business process. Perhaps it's a product design. And if you're trying to get to market as quickly as you can with new products, the more days you add to the design process, the more days you add to the actual getting products to the market faster, there's a slippage in revenue. And that's a problem that actually can be very costly for an organization. And also at the bottom we have audit and logging, which is really critical. No, it is needed to, here again, comply with the various regulations I talked about earlier that can either be internal or external. Now, with a robust MFT solution, as you see now, that has these basic characteristics, a company can be in better position to implement various countermeasures that I talked about earlier to guard against threats and vulnerabilities and overall mitigate and hopefully obviate some of the impacts. Now, what Derek's going to do now is talk about some of the use cases for managed file transfer.
Yeah, thank you, Brent. And I guess the other quick point as we make the transition here to this chart is, you know, and I spent my slides sort of complaining and tearing down about the limitations of the other approaches, but, you know, companies can, you know, tell users what they're doing wrong or you know, complain and against the, you know, the problems, but you know, better to give them the tools they need to do their jobs,
right.
To do it right. So that's what we're talking about here. And here's some of the common use cases too, which is another consideration that needs to be taken into account. What are the common use cases for secure managed file transfer? And I've kind of built this little 2x2 here on the who column, the rows here. There's either person to person or process to process. Person to person refers to an individual sender transferring files, one or more files, to a specific receiver or maybe multiple receivers. So that's the person or person mode. Process to process is where the file transfers are initiated by one process and received by another process, really without direct human intervention. The time-based aspect is on the columns. So the first column there, it says ad hoc or on demand. That means that the file transfers are initiated as needed as opposed to at some specific scheduled time. The other column talks about scheduled or event-driven. So file transfers in those cases are initiated based on either some specific time-based schedule, or maybe they're triggered by the occurrence of some specific event. Now, in the intersection of these rows and columns, I just try to give some examples. These are certainly not exhaustive by any means, but as you all think about your own, you know, use cases inside your own companies, you probably think of some scenarios that map into these four quadrants in your own environment. So in the ad hoc on demand, that's probably one of the most common. It's definitely in the email examples that we talked about, or some of the consumer-oriented Dropbox solutions, probably very common. Sending bids and proposals back and forth is a very common example. Marketing organizations that are sending creative content back and forth between themselves and their agencies and so on. Healthcare is a great example where you've got maybe telemedicine and remote practitioners who are depending on data being transferred back and forth securely in an ad hoc on-demand session as part of their patient care. That's another great example. I just dwell for a second on the bottom right as well. These are kind of the process-to-process, scheduled or event-driven. Here we have examples like scheduled backups maybe, or maybe automated submission of payroll and benefits information. Maybe there's parts inventories that are being automated in your supply chain. I recently talked to a large retailer in the United States, Brent, and it was critical that they were able to transfer financial information to their banks and using this kind of process-to-process, event-driven way. And by automating that, they're able to drive a lot of costs out of their system and actually reduce a lot of errors that were previously existing in their more manual process. So really the point is just to think about these use cases as you evaluate your own need for secure managed file transfer. And I think if I just continue and talk about some of the selection criteria that are super high level here, some of the factors to consider when you're evaluating these solutions. So in addition to any other things we've already talked about, you're going to look at things like ease of use and security and compliance. You're going to look at support for the multiple file types and protocols. I think we've mentioned all this integration with different platforms and applications and infrastructure that you have in your company. You're going to look for the capabilities for security and reliability in your delivery mechanisms, and it has to be cost effective to manage, of course, as well. I think those are even among the most important, so I've kind of ringed those in the red rectangle there. But the ability to scale depending on how large your organization is, the total cost of ownership, which is, we all know, not just the initial cost, but the cost to deploy and manage on an ongoing basis. You're also going to look at things like vendor reputation, customer base support, all those kind of things. If I could just roll on through with just a couple high-level recommendations as we've seen in our research, Brent, before I give it back to you. Some of the recommendations that we might make include just starting with the basics. You need to inventory what are your existing file transfer activities. there's got to be a baseline for the use cases and the volumes and the frequencies and the methods and applications and the end user populations. All those things are just kind of a logical thing to do to take stock of what you need to get started. Following that, you can prioritize what are your security control objectives for that data. It's a function of risk. It's a function of audit. It's a function of compliance. We've talked about all those things. You do need to have those consistent policies. That's on the inbound side, on the outbound side, and within the organization. Overall, there just needs to be an approach within the company to safeguard your sensitive data, so those policies are critical. Also need to invest in documentation and awareness and training for the users. So again, tell them what to do and tell them how to do it and give them the tools to do it. The users really do need to be made fully aware of their responsibilities for protecting the organization's data, as well as their, they certainly know their duties in terms of carrying out their jobs, but they need to know these things as well. Notice that none of these things have involved any vendor or any technology. These are all kind of things that you do kind of prior to that fact, or maybe along with your trusted vendor. But here, finally, we get to the point of selecting and deploying the secure managed file transfer solution. You probably deliberately move away, in my opinion, from this tangled digital do-it-yourself approach and in favor of implementing a more common approach, especially the larger organizations will favor that. You're going to want to measure and monitor your activity, and that's where some of those auditing capabilities, Brent, that you talked about come into play. You want to review and analyze that data on a regular basis so you can optimize your system. And you want to automate enforcement whenever you can. You want to notify end users and standardize on all these reporting and so on. These are just things that help you drive down that bell-shaped curve that I was talking about to be among the best in class. So you can do all these things and you can improve and be more efficient at that over time as well. I think is really the point.
Great.
All right, so yep, that's it. That's the end of the recommendations here.
Okay, so I think where we're moving to now is polling question number 3, which Bob will discuss, and then we'll kind of look at the results.
All right, polling question number 3. Which of the following objectives is most relevant for your organization? A, adherence to data security policies and mandates for governance or compliance. B, reduction of disparate FTP processes. C, compliance with new trading partner security requirements, i.e. banking. D, controlling the amount of data taxing email servers. Or E, reduce the use of internet, for example, Dropbox. Just a few more seconds here. Okay, a little more of a split this time. Here are your results.
Derek, what I'm seeing here is a good split, as you mentioned, Bob, and it's the 2 points are compliance with new trading partner security requirements, such as banking, the SFTP requirement, which we see a lot in the marketplace. A lot of our customers now are implementing the SFTP adapter in order to comply with the exchange. And also, we haven't seen as much, but we're starting to see a growing need for companies who are knowledge workers who are using the internet to send large files, such as Dropbox. And companies here, again, not wanting to be a burden to the knowledge workers by preventing them from using Dropbox. But companies are now saying, is there a more efficient, effective way for allowing for large file transfers from both internal and external to our companies?
No, Brian, we see risk and compliance as sort of classic perennial drivers, and then you have certain things that come along a little more topical given the current environment, like Dropbox, and so it's definitely what we see as well.
Great. Guys, what I'm going to do now is spend a little bit more time with Seeberger and talk about, at a high level, we're going to talk about now what is the best-in-class kind of a managed file transfer solution that can provide the robust compliance and security that we're talking about to effectively have an impact on your managed file transfer requirements. Seaburger has a rich heritage in managing data, and that's what gives rise to what we do in a managed file transfer world. So what I'm going to do, just real briefly, the next 3 slides, is talk about the broad view of Seaburger from a product perspective. Now, Seaburger is more than just a B2B EDI company. It is a complete business integration solution company, and our mission is to support our customers in efficiently linking their diverse business partners, their documents, both structured and complex, purchasing and ordering processes by using, and our real focus is helping them use one simple, innovative solution, which is called, in the middle here you see Business Integration Server, or BIS for short. It's the best-of-breed gateway that enable organizations to really tie together, here again, their partners and their back-end processes. At a high level, again, we also focus on what we can do with the back-end type ERP-type integrations, and our focus there is we have a tight extension suite of products that enable us to work directly with SAP-type solutions where we can streamline the order-to-cash process, and we also can provide what we call the end-to-end visibility, looking at your EDI transactions through to your IDOC movement and posting of orders within your SAP environment, and that product is particularly called Supply Chain Monitor. So overall, if you're a CPG organization on the phone and you're thinking about Seaburger and our rich heritage of what we're doing in helping companies integrate their business processes, basically we have a prepackaged solutions. We have, here again I mentioned solution extensions for SAP, and more importantly we have a product called iMark One that really enables you to do one thing that's really critical that I'm seeing now in the marketplace, where companies are reaching down to their 3rd and 4th tier suppliers who can only exchange via the internet, and providing them with a vehicle to use web forms in order to exchange, the order-to-cash business documents in order to streamline the order-to-cash business process. So with that gives you kind of a reflection of our rich heritage that we bring, not only from a B2B perspective, but when I'm going to talk about what we bring and how we're able to leverage that skill set and that knowledge and expertise into the MFT world. Now, as you can see at the bottom here in blue, you can see starting at the foundation, we have a product called CMFT, and that's Seaburger for short, Managed File Transfer. It's the centralized server for providing policy management and governance over the movement of all these unstructured documents that we've been talking about since the beginning of this webinar. It has what we call it has those lists of MFT functions that I talked about earlier, that I described in terms of workflow management, visibility, that are required here again to implement and govern the policies of movement of documents. Now, what you see up top, we're going to talk about some of the critical components that make up our entire suite of solutions. Now, here's the group you'll see that's called Managed Integration. This is a group of what we call system-to-system connections. And the first product we have is called C-Link. It addresses the following type challenges. For example, if you have an external challenge that, for example, if you have a remote distribution center that needs to exchange, let's say, sensitive inventory data, but that particular remote location, they don't have technical expertise and the communication lines are not good, so they barely know how to use FTP that well, and sometimes the inventory files that they're sending to you don't come consistently for various reasons. Let's say, for example, you have various systems on a number of internal systems, that is, on a number of different platforms, let's say an AIX system and a Windows system, and you really need to exchange data with those particular systems, but more importantly, you want to gain visibility to know what's going wrong if something goes wrong, for example. So what C-Link does is it addresses those system-to-system requirements. It basically can connect with PCs or server and actually facilitate the transfer of these documents. And here's how it does it. It achieves this by using what we call a lightweight client that is installed on the CMFT server itself and at the endpoint. What we mean by endpoint, remember the scenario I gave you with a distribution center that has an FTP site and are having problems sending these inventory files. That would be considered an endpoint. It can either be, here again, a server, or it can actually be a PC. Or if you have internal systems, as I mentioned, an AIX platform and a Windows server, you can put endpoints on those particular servers as well. Now, this lightweight client then integrates to those endpoints, and then that lightweight gateway client integrates to those endpoints applications, which is great. So the next thing that happens is those particular endpoints can now communicate and exchange data back and forth. Now the partner can transfer any document of any size and can communicate to any platform no matter what operating system that you have in place. Now, for example, if translation services are required at the endpoint, let's say at the distribution center, C-Link provides, for example, the ability to translate maybe a CSV file for a backend application at your location. If you also need to have an automatic scheduling process, let's say batch schedule these inventory reports or give me event-driven inventory reports, C-Link has the ability to perform those tasks. And also, more importantly, as I mentioned, because that distribution center has some problems with consistently sending that inventory report, maybe because of the line drops, C-Link has the ability for checkpoint restart. Now, a point of difference in the marketplace with C-Link is the future product, or the future evolution, I'll call it, of C-Link, and it's called peer-to-peer ability. So here's what happens. Instead of sending the payload from one, say, server, this distribution center sends its payload to MFT server that has C-Link on it, sometimes a server can create a bottleneck. And so what you do instead is you send metadata over to the server to obtain permissions to send between the various links. And then what you do is you send the data from a C-Link endpoint and you send it directly to another C-Link endpoint, which what it does is it simplifies the actual process of exchanging documents without having the server being the bottleneck. And that's one of the greatest points of difference you'll find in the marketplace with C-Link. The next one is called C-Adapter, which is another, again, a system-to-system adapter. And what it does is this. It focuses on providing system-to-system exchanges when an adapter is already in place at an endpoint. So looking at the poll responses, what I saw was that there were a number of people saying banks are requiring SFTP. And that's a great example. For example, if you have a bank that says you need to send your documents via SFTP, what C-Link does is it utilizes not C-Link, I'm sorry, C-Adapter, what it does is it sits inside of the CMFT centralized server. And what it does is it meets the requirement of sending out SFT-based documents over to a bank. And now you have the ability to leverage the servers, the CMFT servers, and that's the blue box down at the bottom, as policy and governance services during the exchanges. Now what we're going to do is move to what we call managed collaboration. And that's human-to-human collaboration, or ad hoc collaboration, or human-to-system collaboration. And typically the challenges you're looking at, and we talked about quite a few of these, is when a knowledge worker is not able to send a file through the email system because the file is too large, or knowledge workers being hampered by the fact that they have to wait for an FTP site to be put in place, or if the FTP site is not working well, for support to respond to it. So they're hampered by not being able to execute their job. Or you don't want to place a lot of sensitive data out on the internet, leveraging some of these internet solutions out there, such as Dropbox, as we saw in the poll. And you don't want to put sensitive data on flash drives. CFX here again manages these types of challenges. Now, CFX has two basic components. It has a web-based shared folder approach where you publish information to the folder and you subscribe to the folder as well. And it also has an email plugin. Now, let's talk about that for a second. From a shared folder perspective, users have access, internal users have access to CFX from a web-based browser to upload and download information to the folders. Then they provide secure access to those folders to either internal or external partners, who then access the folders for secure uploading and downloading while all the information is being audited and notifications occur when exceptions do happen. Another human-to-human exchange, as I just talked about, another component of CFX, and CFX means C-File Exchange, is the email plugin. Now, the email plugin sits in the background on Outlook. So you can imagine seeing Outlook with a little icon that says C plugin, for example. The plugin, by the use of various triggers, either the size of a document, or the extension on a document, or the content of the document, will automatically place a targeted document on one of those secure folders for access by a targeted recipient. Because what happens is the recipient will receive a link instead of that specific document, because the document's in the folder. That link will take that specific user to the folder. So now you have complete control over the exchange of all this information going back and forth. So there's no restrictions on file size. There's no setup that's associated with FTP, and there's far more security and visibility for everyone involved in managing the exchange of these very sensitive documents. And more importantly than anything else is a zero barrier to the knowledge worker for performing their daily tasks using emails. So finally, what we'd like to say is this. When you take a look at managed file transfer compared to FTP, with an integrated managed file transfer solution, you close the gaps that were left open by FTP. Now here again, FTP has been around for a while and it's done a great job. Now we're reaching to the next level, and that's what managed file transfer is designed to do. So now you have more of a strategic solution versus a tactical solution that FTP and some of these short-term solutions have provided at this point in time. Now, this provides you with the ability to gain the benefits of being able to truly manage your unstructured documents within your organization. So if you were to take a quick snapshot at a high level and go inside of an organization and look at the as-is landscape today, the good news is this. Knowledge workers are engaged in the collaboration of all their documents of all types and all sizes using various vehicles, such as email, flash drives, Dropbox, and FTP. That's great. What can be improved is simply the security and the governance of these corporate assets. So if we were to take a picture and go to the potential 2B environment, and what we see in the 2B environment is a simplified view. We're using an integrated MFT B2B solution that manages all the use cases that we just talked about. So now you can allow the knowledge workers to access all the documents and access all the vehicles that they need to exchange the various documents in a safe, secure, compliant manner. You use a centralized server to help enforce those policies and the governance, and especially the auditing of all the information and the visibility. You have that critical visibility of who is sending what, who are they sending it to, and what is being sent. More importantly, what has been scheduled for transmission that did not occur and why? With FTP, you can't answer those questions. And also, more importantly, from a cost standpoint, you reduce your footprint of the number of devices you have out there, and also you're able to reduce your costs. So if we were to take a quick look, we're almost done here, a quick look at how we apply the CFX and Seaburger MFT solution across those swim lanes. So let's say you look at your human resource department, who will send out benefit enrollment updates to managed care providers. And we've all done this. We've changed our eligibility. There's either adds, deletions, or changes. And right now, the human resource department uses FTP. But the managed care organization says, well, we want to start using SFTP. So what do? Well, you know you have a system-to-system type of integration that's required, and you know that since the managed care organization already has SFTP, all you do is you put SFTP inside of the CMFT adapter server, the centralized server, so now you have a CF adapter that's communicating SFTP to the managed care organization, providing the governance and policy management that you require. If you look at an accounting department that receives a large number of point-of-sale information from multiple stores via FTP, and there's problems with some of the transmissions failing, and the CFO is trying to aggregate his quarterly numbers to know exactly where they stand, and if he's missing information, he doesn't want to be non-compliant with Sarbanes-Oxley. And so what you can do is then use a CMFT solution, which will be, in this case, a system-to-system connection using C-Link, because C-Link can stretch out to all those point-of-sale terminals and ensure that all the information is coming back and forth. It's monitored, it's checkpoint, restart, there's encryption, there's security, and that's what organizations are now looking to move towards in order to get a better position in the marketplace. And finally, as Derek mentioned, you have a marketing department that's sending out new product images, videos, designs, store layouts, and they're working with internal organization and external organization. They use a lot of the email and drop boxes. So now you know that's a human-to-human type interaction, and you use CFX. You use it to allow the exchange of emails and allow the exchange of shared folders so that all the information can be governed with checkpoint restart and management and visibility all in one. So this is how you leverage the Seaburger best of practices integrated, centralized, managed file transfer solution to solve a plethora of the challenges that we just talked about earlier with using the current vehicles. What I'd like to do right now is just give you a quick highlight of who Seaburger is if you don't know who we are. We fundamentally have been a leader in the industry for quite some time. We're ranked by IT analysts. We have over 8,500 customers. We provide a wide range of solutions across many industries. If you think about who we are and you want to say, well, what do we focus on? We focus on connecting people, connecting processes. We can serve both large companies and small companies. We connect to a variety of ERP systems. We support all the standards in the marketplace. More importantly, we have an integrated MFT solution to serve multiple needs in the marketplace. So in summary, what we're walking away saying today is this: data breaches are very prevalent in the industry. There's a cost associated with them. And basically, we talked about the 3 V's and the 3 C's that will continue to happen within the industry. And so our recommendation is to consider an integrated managed file transfer solution that ensures a high level of security and governance. The Seaburger solution, the MFT solution, is best in class. It provides you with a list of solutions from C-Link through the CFX and C-Adapter to ensure that all the use cases that are needed to help knowledge workers not only execute their task, but do it in a safe, secure, compliant manner will be in place. So what I'd like to do is open it up for questions and answers at this point in time.
Yeah, we don't really have much time, but maybe a couple of quick questions for you. Why have companies continued to use FTP for their managed file transfer requirements, given the compelling case you make for MFT here?
One view that I have when I talk to customers, and this is Brent speaking, is simply that they said this behavior has been crystallized in the organization or the culture. It's just something they've done for a time because the whole idea is to get the knowledge worker executing on their day-to-day task. There has not necessarily been an eye to how do we make sure that we're compliant when we're going down those swim lanes, so to speak, and making sure we're not getting fines for breaching the data. I think we're reaching a point now of consciousness where people are saying, okay, we really now need to not only manage our purchase orders and invoices, we now need to manage this plethora of data flowing throughout our organization.
And maybe as an offshoot of that question, what would you say to people who think that MFT solutions just get in the end user's way, or they slow things down?
Let me take that one. It's Derek here. What we've seen at Aberdeen when we measure, I talked before about efficiency and effectiveness, right? Efficiency is that cost savings, being able to support higher scale at lower cost, and effectiveness is about, reducing the number of incidents that you have actually experienced. That's that avoidance factor. We consistently measure both of those, and the top performers are focusing first on being secure and compliant, and then on driving the cost down and being well managed. But always they're focused on supporting and enabling the objectives of their business. So in practical terms, this means that all companies, and really all sizes, are trying to deal with these business benefits of collaboration and agility and productivity and innovation and growth and lower cost. All those things are what they're really got their eyes on, but at the same time, most companies are also aware that they've got to deal with these associated risks and privacy issues, compliance issues that they just have to manage. So they don't want to drive risk to zero. That would be getting in the way. You could drive them to zero by disconnecting everybody and saying there aren't any transfers allowed and just saying no to collaboration altogether. That's obviously not going to work. So ideally, again, you want to. I liken it to the ideal referee in a game. You make good calls, you enforce the rules of fair play, but you generally don't get in the way of the people playing the game. So that's really what the MFT, enterprise class MFT, is all about.
Okay, should I turn it back to Brent and Derek to close it out?
Yes, I think what we talked about today was really important for those who've been on the line to understand the importance now of the next frontier. The next frontier is now how do we look at those documents, those planning documents, those execution documents, those monitoring documents, I should say, and leverage those in a way that we can now manage them, to make sure they're secure, to make sure the secret recipe doesn't get out, to make sure that we can probably improve processes with better collaborative procedures. And I believe that the Seeberger solution gives people an opportunity to look at how we can put a solution in place to specifically help them achieve that objective.
All right.
Derek, you have anything you want to add?
I just want to give my thanks for joining you. Everyone, thanks for your time and attention. It's an important topic. I hope you found some good value, and I think all of our contact information is here on the screen now, so if there's any questions for me, there's my email, and Brent, same for you. There's the Seeberger information, your information there as well.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Derek, and thanks the audience. Thanks here again to Supply Chain Brain for allowing us to have this great discussion on managed file transfer.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.